Hello, and welcome to This Movie Needs More Flavor. I'm Josh,
I'm Adam.
and today our topic is the 1990 sci fi action extravaganza Total Recall. Directed by Paul Verhoeven and written, at least in part, by Dan O'Bannon and Gary Goldman, both no strangers to sci fi genre. Total Recall stars Arnold Schwarzenegger as Douglas Quaid, an everyday drone who literally dreams of a life on Mars filled with adventure and intrigue and a mysterious exotic woman played by Rachel Ticotin. Despite the objections of his coworker and wife Sharon Stone, his obsession leads him to Recall, a memory implant company offering the escape he's been seeking. In a twist of fate, it would seem the procedure triggers dormant memories, revealing Quaid is indeed a double agent on Mars. Sought by Kuato the mutant, pursued by Cohagen, played by Ronnie Cox, and compelled to discover the truth and save the day Arnie style, Quaid gets his ass to Mars. And now I'd like to open it up to my co-caster Adam for his take on this sci-fi classic.
All right, thank you, Josh. Okay, so apparently this movie was in a script hell since the 1970s when the short story came out. And originally, the script was much more in line with Philip K. Dick's short story. It was about an office guy, kind of ineffectual, who dreamed of a more adventurous life. And they originally wanted Richard Dreyfuss in that role because, in the 1970s, he was coming off of Jaws, and, well, the script seemed to go nowhere, and it kept getting passed through, and eventually Arnold Schwarzenegger found out about it. He was very interested in this role, but the production company that had the rights to the script wasn't making any deals with him. Well, that company eventually fell through. They ran into some problems, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to buy up that script. Once he did, he was able to assert more creative control, have the script changed a little bit and tailored to his style, more action-oriented. He was also able to secure a director that he admired at the time, Paul Verhoeven. He had just come off the heels of RoboCop, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was a fan of that. So anyway, one of the things about this movie is I think it's very quirky. There's so many little quirky things woven in through it, and some funny, sometimes unintentionally funny things. There's a couple of things I noticed is that at least twice when somebody FaceTimes another person, the person answering the call turns their head to answer the call, and it comes across kind of funny. It's just like, is that something you have to do? Is that part of the program? It activates something? Like, why are you turning your head?
I don't think it happened often, but it was a little melodramatic.
I'm nitpicking there. Another thing that it's unintentionally funny, and maybe there's something wrong with me here, but there's a scene in... There's a scene where one of the henchmen, Richter, his sidekick, is stabbed by a little woman. And originally the scene was very, very gory. She stabs him in the groin, and then she goes back in with a stab to the gut, and then carves him up to the chest. It looked very, very grisly in its original state. But the MPAA, apparently they wanted Paul Verhoeven and his team to cut it down a little bit. So the only way they found it reasonable to do that was to immediately go from the stab, boom, to a close-up shot of Richter's sidekick. And yeah, there's something wrong with it, but that gets a laugh out of me every single time. It's just, I don't know, it's just how it is. There are scenes where an actor has prosthetic makeup on with the character Kuato. Allegedly, it took over 10 guys to work that Kuato puppet, and there are certain times where it was not feasible to remove that, so the actor had to go about his day-to-day life with that puppet still on him. And allegedly, there were witnesses to this who had no idea they were filming a movie and were so taken aback with how good, at least at the time, how good the effects were, that they actually referred to the puppet as, quote, a real freak, and they wanted to know what the deal with it was. So I guess that's a huge compliment to Rob Bottin, who was head of that team. Ultimately, the making of this film was very fruitful for Paul Verhoeven and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I believe Arnold Schwarzenegger put a lot of effort into promoting this film and making it as successful as it was. Both the director and the actor actually wanted to go on and make another film together. And Apparently, it was damn near finalized. It had the script complete, it had the sets, it had everything locked into place. But the company making that film also fell on financial hardship. And that film was going to be an epic crusade film. That's ultimately what they wanted to do. They wanted to take it to a different locale, do something big with it. So it would have been interesting to see what they had in store for it, but ultimately nothing came of it. That's essentially my thing about this film.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. And I'm a big fan of Total Recall, always have been since the first time I saw it. And I'm a fan of any movie, really, that promotes a lively debate among movie buffs. My favorite debate is always going to be who's the alien at the end of John Carpenter's The Thing. And in Total Recall, we have the question of was it real or was it all just a delusion? And I'm not going to dive into that debate. Suffice to say that I am team it was all real because it makes me feel good to think it was all real. And that's my main argument right there. So I'm not going to get into the debate.
So you would be the Quaid character that wants it all to be real, huh?
Exactly. I just want to express my appreciation for Verhoeven's and screenwriter Gary Goldman's efforts to consistently maintain both narratives. Throughout the entire film, there are multiple points that strongly suggest one or the other, but there is never a point where we're given definitive evidence of either one. And they purposely did that. They did that to present a reality where not only could you choose, but you ultimately did not have to. And that's fairly high concept sci-fi for what's essentially a extravaganza 80s action movie.
So you kind of get the best of both worlds. It's cerebral, but also shut your brain off and just eat the popcorn sort of thing.
Absolutely. Sci-fi, action, gotta love both. And like any good sci-fi, Total Recall comes complete with excellent visual effects. I won't go into the 40 plus matte paintings that are all beautiful. What I will get into is the character visual effects, and as you said, that was Rob Bottin's work. And his work on the mutants is especially what I appreciate. But beyond that, I mean, from the tracker removal scene where he's prying it out of his nose
Right.
to all the way to the decompression scene where there's all those little air bladders kicking off and then the eyeballs are bulging out. It's beautiful.
The decompression scene, I have actually heard a theory that it was purposely comical to give you the impression that it's not real, which kind of fuels the fire of what is it real, is it not real. Either way, that adds to the quirkiness, and I dig it.
Again, not going to go into whether or not that's a qualifier for it being a dream, but it definitely looks surreal, so you got a point there. My favorite bit for the visual effects is definitely the mutants, and the thing I appreciate the most about it is how each deformity is unique to the characters, and I mean the most extreme being Kawato. And yes, it did take like 10 to 15 puppeteers to work that dude. And the notion that at first the idea was to have a little guy coming out of his forehead. And Botten did that, and it just looked too monstrous. It looked too disturbing, and he wanted it to look natural. And I mean, Kuato looks far from natural, but when you think about it, he's simply a baby coming out of a stomach, and that's just pretty close to natural. On the other end, again, Total Recall, sci-fi. It's also an action movie. My favorite female leads in action films are badass women. You know, give me a badass woman over a damsel in distress any day. Give me Adrienne Barbeau in Escape from New York versus, what's her name? Judith O'Dea in Night of the Living Dead. I want to see somebody who's tough in my movie where everybody's tough. So, I mean, first you got Sharon Stone in the character of Lori, and she's essentially a honeypot, but in my mind, honeypot is very underrated. I mean, that is an undercover assignment. I mean, it takes nerves of steel to go undercover, and I mean, she's no slouch about it. When the jig's up, she makes multiple attempts, personally, multiple attempts on Quaid. And the last one, does she plead for her life? No. she draws on him even though he's got the drop on her. Not successfully, but I mean, she still does. And prior to that, we have Rachel Ticotin's character, Melina, kicking through the elevator doors and cutting everybody in half with an automatic. All right. Right before Sharon Stone's character kicks it clean out of her hands, and they have one of the best fight scenes in the film. I mean, mostly because the other fight scenes are just Arnie like laying waste to people.
Doing his thing.
Yeah, but still one of the best fight scenes in the film. And last but certainly not least is Debbie Lee Carrington and her gut stab. You got to appreciate that, regardless of whether or not aspects of it were cut out. And I'd love to see that whole cut. I'd love to see that vision. But again, a hardline character. And 2 seconds after she gut stabs that dude, I mean, with a knife that's, twice the size she is, up on top of the bar, mowing people down with an Uzi. And yeah, if that's not a badass woman, I don't know what is. So finally, I want to say what a big fan of Verhoeven's Sci-Fi I am. His trilogy of this, RoboCop, as you mentioned earlier, and Starship Troopers are, I feel, very well crafted and entertaining movies. And I love how, especially, they are all satires of authoritarianism. I love how the antagonist is always this big, whether it's a corporation, organization, it's some mass entity that is basically operating based off of greed and indifference. And I love how we have a hyper macho hero being hyper violent. That is the 80s, and the guy that he uses as a human shield on the escalator just immediately springs to mind. So if you're a fan of all those things in an 80s sci-fi wrapper, Total Recall is a must watch.
The music sampled was Brave in Spirit by Alexei Anisimov, courtesy of TuneTank.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, you could always like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and follow us on Instagram. All that fun and flavorful stuff that really helps us out a bunch. Our info is in the bio.
And I'd like to thank you all for listening in and hope you do so again.